All right, good morning. We're here at the intermediate chess lecture at the LA Chess Club. This is Saturday morning. We're going to start off with the game of Vukovic versus Deutsch, Zagreb, Yugoslavia, 1920. Mr. Vukovic starts with e4. Great opening move for white. Why? Bishop out, queen out, sits on one of the four center squares, controls a center square. So if it's good enough for Mr. Vukovic, Mr. Deutsch says, why not for me too? So e5. And we probably are going to have a Ruy Lopez opening, knight f3. Attack the unguarded pawn. Knight c6. Guard, develop, control two center squares. So it looks pretty good so far. Bishop b5, attacking the guard of the pawn. Gee, if I take this knight, then I can take this pawn for free. The problem is, of course, is that you haven't castled. There's an open file. The queen will attack the knight. The knight will have to come back. The queen will take the pawn, say check. It's a whole mess, and you really don't want to do this until after you've castled. This opening now is being made very popular by Magnus Carlsen, who is the current world champion. This is the Berlin defense to the Ruy Lopez. You immediately attack the unguarded pawn with the knight f6. There's all kinds of situations here now. White can castle, let black take the pawn, have the rook come over, attack the knight. If the pawn takes, you can attack it this way. And again, because pawn hunting in the opening sequences is not a good idea till after you've castled. There's too many open lines that can be used for attacking your king. So sure enough, d4, which is not bad. So if you take me, I will take you. If you take me, I will take you. And we'll pretty much have an even-Steven game again, okay? So black says, I'm taking first. E takes d. And instead of taking the knight, having a pawn take the bishop, getting your pawn back this way or this way, white tries a little shtick. I'm going to attack your knight. I'll let this pawn sit here for a while. I can take it back anytime I want to. I'm attacking it once, I'm attacking it twice, you're only guarding it once. So I can get that pawn back anytime I want, but I'm going to force your knight to move. Okay, so knight in. He has to save the knight. And interesting, white decides to protect this pawn twice, even though it's being attacked only once. And he's developing queenside before kingside. I think I personally would have castled. I don't know about this move either. f5. I want my knight centralized right in the center here, right in your territory, and I don't want it going anywhere. I want it to control all of these squares right in the center. Beautiful posted knight. Of course, pawn can take en passant, right? But he doesn't.
Sorry.
First thing he does is...
Can you explain to me the rules of en passant?
Sure. In chess, if a pawn engages another pawn after he's crossed into the enemy territory, like white's pawn, and this pawn comes here, obviously he has the choice of taking this, right?
Yes, sir.
Or he doesn't have to. It's not checkers where you have to jump, right? Okay? But suppose this pawn says, you know, if I stop here, he might take me, and I don't want that to happen. I want this pawn to guard this knight. So this pawn is saying to this pawn, even though you braved the battlefield into enemy territory, I'm going to chicken out and not give you a chance to take me. I'm going to pass you.
Yes.
Well, the French about 300 years ago felt this was very unfair to this soldier who braved the battlefield and went into enemy territory. And for this guy to chicken out and not give him a chance to be taken, said, we're going to invent a rule that if you pass this pawn, he can take you as if you stopped there. But you have to do it right after he passes you. You can't make another move and come back later and do it. So if he wanted to, he could take him as if he did stop there, to give this soldier the opportunity to engage him.
Yes,
okay? And it would be the same for black. If the black pawn were here and this pawn went here, he could take him also. And what's good for the goose is good for the gander, okay? So that's the en passant rule, all right? So if white had wanted to, he could have taken him, but he didn't, okay? He decided that instead of taking the pawn en passant, he would take the knight. And sure enough, bishop takes knight. D takes bishop to allow this bishop to come out and protect his little pawn over here at f5. And now it's interesting. This pawn is sitting here, and the queen decides to take back. Now, obviously, the queen can take, but then you'll just take back. And it looks like white has got his pawn back. Okay? So pretty much at the end of the exchange, it's bishop pawn, knight pawn, which is pretty much even, because in the open sequences, the knights and the bishops are pretty much equal to 3 points in power each on a scale of 1 to 10. As the game progresses towards endgame, bishops will go up to 4 points. So if you can hold on to your bishops to the end, they actually go up 1 full point above the knight for the endgame. Okay? And that's why if you study Grandmaster games, you'll see that they usually try to keep both bishops for the endgame, because that's 8 points against 2 knights in endgame, which would be 6. And that should be enough to win. 2 bishops against 2 knights at the highest levels is usually enough. The 2 bishops can beat the 2 knights. Okay, so queen takes. And instead of black taking back, he says, look, he says, I don't like my double pawns. Pawns on top of each other are not really good because they can't help each other. Okay? So he's saying, if we're going to trade queens, you take mine and let me undouble my pawns. Okay, we'll trade, but we'll trade my way, not your way. I will impose my will on you. You won't impose your will on me. And there's a lot of that goes on in a chess game at the highest levels. I will show you who's boss. And you've got to get rid of that thinking, because that will get you in trouble, okay? Because then your ego takes over, and you might look at the position differently and say, well, you know, if I were a master or a grandmaster, the position would dictate that I make this move. But that guy got me so angry, I'm going to make this move and show him who's boss. And you have to stop thinking like that. Chess is not that kind of game, okay? Yeah, you probably could to attack the black queen. Why not? And that would probably even force him to take. Or he would have to move away. Maybe he'd move over here, pin the knight to the king.
What about the queen just moves slanting?
Goes where?
Just moves one slant down.
Where, here?
Yeah.
Yeah, he could do that.
But then that's giving.
But then the queen says check. And of course the bishop could come back, but then the knight could take the bishop. Well, you have to look at all the possibilities. That's why chess is such a hard game. Chess is a hard game. It's not it's easy to learn, but it is really hard to play well.
Then the knight blocks it.
That's right, but only for one move, and then you might try to get rid of that pin too. All right, let's see what he did. So the knight came up to d5 and said, we'll trade my way. And look, your move. The grandmaster actually played knight c3 to attack the queen. What a wonderful idea, okay? And sure enough, my move. He pins the knight to the king. So we're playing grandmaster chess, guys.
Could the pawn move doubled up so it doesn't?
Well, what white wants to do is, white really wants to checkmate this king because the king hasn't castled. So white brings the rook over to d1 and is threatening to come down here and say check. The king will come here, but he will get mated with this knight, and it's too much power.
King do?
Okay?
So now.
Well, the king can't castle now because the bishops are blocking. It's black to move. White just moved. Yes, the white king probably should have castled,
Like
but he decided that he would threaten black first. Okay? So black says, uh-oh, I'll guard the check square with the bishop, and I'm going to castle now. Right? That's a good idea. Aha. I'm wondering, oh, I see. White came back and took away the pin on the knight. Of course, this knight can take the bishop now, right? But he didn't. He developed his last minor piece, and now black has the option of castling on the king's side or the queen side. Gives him a few more choices. That's a very interesting move.
Can't you do knight takes knight now? On c3, knight takes knight.
Knight takes
Then a
knight,
free
pawn
knight.
takes
No,
knight.
you don't, because then bishop takes queen.
Bishop takes queen. Oh, I see, because if you take the knight here, there's a discovered attack on the queen.
It's a free piece.
But the
That knight's hanging
but
now.
the queen could take it.
Yeah, if the queen takes the bishop, the knight, which is now on e4, would take the queen again.
I like that move. Let's see what he does. Okay, so after this was the last move, and then this was the move for white, right? So he saw that, and black moved away. He moved away from the discovered attack. Yeah, he saw that coming. Very good. Okay, so let's take a look. Rerouting his knights to the king side in case, I think white is telling black, I'm not going to commit castling until I know where your king is going first. So they're both playing a waiting game. Double up on the queen.
Queen takes, no. Queen won't. Oh! Now I got messed up by his own bishop.
Well, queen to queen, bishop 4.
Bishop e3.
Well, wait a second. Queen. This is an interesting move here. Bishop to queen 2. All right, so queen knight 3. Knight to king 2. Bishop to queen, bishop 4. But why is this bishop over here? This bishop is not here. This bishop didn't come here. Where did it go? Bishop to king 2. Oh, I see what I did. Okay, I read it. I read this and this is the same move. This is still here. This is still here. He hasn't moved here yet. Okay. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 moves. White announced checkmate in 6 moves at this point.
Wait, isn't the queen supposed to move?
Yes, the queen is supposed to move because she's under attack. And white said checkmate in 6 moves. What's the first move, guys?
Queen d8 check.
Yes.
Oh, sack.
Wait,
Queen d8 check.
she could just get taken.
Oh, I
It's a
see.
risk.
King takes queen.
It's a risk.
Bishop
Oh,
g6.
bishop,
Or bishop
Bishop
g5.
bishop g5 check.
Double check.
Double check from the rook and thing. King back.
Double discover check, yeah.
Rook down check. King f7.
E6.
e6 is correct. King has no choice but to take the pawn.
Knight f4 check.
Knight f4 check is correct. King back is the only move.
And now knight to e5 checkmate.
Correct.
Yeah.
Checkmate.
Wow, that's that.
Sacrifice the queen. I would've never
Yeah, but you see, the thing is, what you have to do is realize that with all of these pieces gathered in the center here, the queen, the bishops, the 2 knights, it's ripe for a sacrifice. When Tal was world champion in 1960, he was the greatest sacrificial world champion in history. The very first thing he says when he looks at the chessboard for combinations is, how can I sacrifice my queen? And if there's no way to sacrifice my queen, how can I sacrifice a rook? And if there's no way to sacrifice a rook, how can I sack a bishop? And then a knight. And then he would look for ways to sacrifice material, but he couldn't do it until he had built up this kind of onslaught in the center that would allow this kind of maneuvering. Okay? And I do apologize for that, missing that bishop move. The problem with this book is that it's the old English notation of pawn to king 4. There's no algebraic numbers like d4, d5, and I'm extrapolating it, and sometimes it gets very confusing. But Let's try another one. This is the Correspondence World Championship from 1947. Mr. Wickstrom versus Mr. Wood. You guys know what the Correspondence Championship is? Back then, they didn't have emails or computers, so they had to send what was called letters or postcards to each other through the mail. I know it sounds like 150 years ago, but
Wait, that.
it was only about 30 or 40 years ago.
That's one of the ways they play.
Okay, so Mr. Winstrom is white, Mr. Wood is black. This one starts d4. Great opening move for white because it sits on one of the 4 center squares, controls a center square. It does allow this bishop for development, but this is a much slower buildup. There's not going to be a whole lot of fireworks like there were with the last game with e4, e5. You saw the sacrifices and the way it works. You're not going to get that with d4. This is a very slow, steady kind of buildup. d5, classical position, and now we have c4. Anybody know what the name of this opening is? Queen's Gambit. Everybody know what a gambit is? A gambit is giving away a free pawn in the opening sequences so that your opponent will gobble the pawn but not develop any of his major pieces or minor pieces, so his army is like one move behind. You are giving away a free point that may or may not cost you the game 30 or 40 moves from now, but in those 30 or 40 moves, the fact that he couldn't get his army onto the battlefield quick enough, that extra pawn isn't going to mean anything because he's never going to make it to endgame. You're going to checkmate him before he can use that extra pawn in the end. Yes, ma'am?
So is the proper answer to not take?
The proper answer is usually not to take. There are sequences where you can take it, but black cannot keep this pawn for the 30 or 40 moves. He must know when to give this pawn back to the other side and get back to even, but he will be allowed to develop his pieces. So yes, and there are sequences in the Queen's Gambit where you can take this, but you cannot hold on to this pawn. You have to give it back, and you have to know when to give it back. So e6, this is all book, this is all the normal. If you take me, I'll take you, but white should not take this pawn and create this, because right now white has a slight advantage in that this light squared bishop is hemmed in by this pawn. And if he takes this and he takes back, all of a sudden this bishop can be developed. And you want to try to keep this hemmed in, okay? Now eventually it will develop. It might even come in the back door over here at b7, but in that extra 3 or 4 or 5 moves of the sequence, the fact that this light squared bishop did not see action for 10 or 12 moves might prove decisive. Again, knight c3. This is the developing move. This is all normal book. Nobody's been able to improve on these sequences yet. Knight f6, developing very quickly. Bishop to g5, creating a what on the queen? A pin. Gentlemen and ladies, in your games of chess that you will play over your lifetime, pins are the #1 tactic you will use the most. You will use them more than knight forks, bishop skewers, discovered checks, double discovered checks, discoveries, everything else. All of the tactics in chess that you will study, pins are the ones that you will use the most. And if you study Bobby Fischer's games over his career, you will find that he used pins just more than anything else, and he made really good use of those pins. Because basically what you're saying is, at least for one move now, this knight cannot move, unless you want to lose the queen, and then you have to take up another game besides chess. Okay, because you can't give away a bishop for a queen, because you just don't understand that a queen is 10 points and a bishop is 4, and you're going to lose the game eventually. So, you know, find another game. Tiddlywinks, Chutes and Ladders, Candyland, all those other games, Monopoly. Relative pin, that is correct. A relative pin, because the rules of chess say you may move this, but you will lose your queen, where if it was a pin on the king, it would be a what kind of pin? Absolute pin, and the rules would say you can't move it.
Isn't there this one, I forget the name, there's one really good checkmate where you do move the knight and sacrifice it?
Yes, and you probably, when the bishop is here, and you can say checkmate here or check, have the king come out.
Yeah, it's like the F7.
Yes, it's a sacrifice. Yeah, there's certain sequences. There might be the Frankenstein Dracula variation of the Roy Lopez. There's a whole book on the Frankenstein Dracula variation of the Roy Lopez. And it's really fascinating. And I'm not kidding when I say Frankenstein Dracula. That's what it's called, the Frankenstein Dracula variation of the Roy Lopez.
Call that because Lucifer's
Okay. All right. Knight developed to d7. It guards the knight other than with the queen, so that if he pushes the pawn here, the queen can leave, and he won't have to worry about doubling the pawns because the knight can take back if the bishop decides to take the knight. White starts to develop very quickly, the king side, and sure enough, c6, because I think the queen's going to come here and get off this nasty pin. That's what's going to be happening.
Oh, and then he can create his own pin on the knight.
All right. C takes D, and you have a choice of taking back with this pawn or this pawn. Now, the general rule in chess is when you have a choice, you take towards the center. So this pawn probably, in the general rule, would be taking, but for some reason, black decided to take with the E pawn. Now, by taking with the E pawn, I think what he said is, I'm going to let this bishop breathe. So when I move this knight away, I can get him out this way. I think that's probably why I did that. Yes, ma'am?
Why doesn't he move the F bishop develop, then he's off the pin?
Oh, you mean here? Because right now he's saying to himself, well, there's no danger because I've just created an escape hatch for my queen, and I don't have to worry about doubling the pawn, so I can do this one more move. I needed the escape hatch first. I think the next move for black would be bishop e7. I think that would be the correct move. Let's see if he follows through with that. So E pawn takes.
Why would you move what is that? F8 to pin the white's.
Oh, the knight over here. Yeah, create his own pin. He could do that also. Let's see what he does. First, white decides that he will get his bishop out, probably here, and he wants to castle. King safety first, and sure enough, takes away the pin. There, that was his move. Okay, so everybody's playing decent chess right now. This is pretty much all book, I guess. And sure enough, black castles and white castles. So I think we're out of book right now. Rook over. What kind of file is the E file with one pawn on it? Semi-open, right? Creating a battery right here to h7. Now, obviously, the knight is covering it and the king. It's 2 against 2. And even if he took the knight and got rid of the guard, he could replace it with a knight. So he's not ready to do this yet, but he's setting it up for maybe 3 or 4 moves from now because he's got some pressure on h7 right now. So black says, hey, you want to give me a check? That's fine. I'll just take you. But meanwhile, let's see what your bishop wants to do. He says, I'm going to take your knight. And he just replaces it with the knight. And now the reason he took back with this pawn before, look what he can do with that light squared bishop now. He gets it out. So he can get his bishop out into the game. Lovely square for the knight. He's crossed into enemy territory. He's radiating control over these 8 squares. Knights are best in the center. You put them over here, there's no squares over here, and you're cutting off the legs of the knight. Okay? Knights on the rim are grim or dim. Either one you want to use is fine. And black says it's time to crack the center open. Let's see what we do. So, if you take, I'll take back. And what kind of sequences do we have here? Well, somebody's trying to create some stuff. Okay. Knight here. Knight here. All right, let's take a look. If knight takes, bishop takes, and you get a little bit closer to the king. F4. This knight is sitting in the beautiful center, supported by 2 pawns, and he's radiating a lot of power. Now, obviously, you could push and try to dislodge him.
No, F6 is terrible. Bishop A6.
Well, I know, but this knight forks. The queen and the rook. It says, who could resist such a knight fork? Okay, first thing is, let's give you a little check. You can't take my queen when you're in check. You have to take care of the check first.
King F8 is the only.
Yes, king f8 is correct, because if he went here, this knight fork would win the queen with a check, right? So he has to go there. It would it be mate? Yes, well, can he take this? You're right, it would be mate, so he has to come here. f8. Queen over. So let's see, if the knight takes the rook, can he come up here and threaten checkmate here? Yeah, he can threaten checkmate. Is there anything black can do about it?
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look.
You can't push.
Well, he doesn't want the queen here or here for sure, because it's coming in here, right? So instead of taking the rook, he goes back. That's an interesting choice.
But that doesn't help.
Actually, I think it does.
Well, because the knight would come here and guard this. That's why. Now he sees that he has no time for knight takes rook. So sure enough, queen up, threatening mate, and the knight goes back to guard. So he saw 3 moves ahead. 1, 2, 3.
So now why doesn't the pawn take c5 and dislodge the knight?
Well, it's a very interesting move anyway, because basically you have a queen sacrifice again.
Oh.
Queen takes pawn check.
I honestly thought you were going to sacrifice.
Knight takes queen,
Knight G6 mate.
and knight g6 mate.
Checkmate.
What is
Even
Wow. 2 minor piece mate. That's like a suffocation.
It is. It's like a what do they call it? A
Smothered.
smothered mate. Yeah. Beautiful. White really was on his game. Beautiful. 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 See that, guys? Queen sacrifices. If you're going to checkmate the king, what do you care if you lose your queen?
Which is what D4 is.
Absolutely. It doesn't mean anything, right?
Yeah, it's quieter until about the
That is just fantastic.
15th move.
Just fantastic. Okay. That was fun. That was a fun one. Okay. Speaking of queen sacrifices, we got another one coming up.